Venerable Anne Line, widow, martyr. Note: Saint Anne Line was beatified in 1929 and later canonized in 1970. During the cruel persecution which raged in England in the reign of Elizabeth, the faith was kept alive in the hearts of the people by zealous priests, who at the risk of their lives traveled from house to say Mass and administer the sacraments. Those who received them or allowed the sacred rites to be celebrated under their roofs were subject to the same terrible penalties as the clergy themselves. Among the many generous souls who laid down their lives in so glorious a cause was the Venerable Anne Line, who was executed at Tyburn on the sole charge of harboring a seminary priest. Mrs. Line was a widow lady residing in London, whose house was a favorite resort of the persecuted clergy, being furnished with ingenious places of concealment in case of sudden danger or surprise. Here the holy sacrifice was frequently celebrated, and the sacraments were administered to the faithful flock. Mrs. Line herself, though suffering from a grievous bodily infirmity, was a weakly communicant, and it is recorded that on one occasion, as she afterwards revealed to her confessor, she beheld our blessed Lord in the Holy Sacrament carrying his cross and inviting her to follow him. This remarkable favor, accompanied by the interior motion of grace, inflamed her soul with an ardent desire of martyrdom, and she bore a holy envy to the priests of God as being, in her opinion, more likely to gain so glorious a crown than a weak and sickly woman like herself. Meanwhile, she strove to render herself worthy of so sublime a grace, and gave great edification by her holy conversation, her unalterable patience, her spirit of mortification, and her heroic acts of Christian charity. At length the happy day arrived when God vouchsafed to bestow upon her the desire of her heart. Upon Candlemas Day, when a priest was already at the altar in a chamber of her house and was commencing Mass, the doors were beset by pursuivants, who found them strongly barred and secured from the inside. Some time elapsing before they were able to effect their entrance, the priest had time to take off his vestments and escape. Finding themselves baffled of their expected prey, the pursuivants, after ransacking the house, apprehended Mrs. Line with another lady of rank, who was afterwards released through the influence of her friends, and conducted them both to prison. Not many days later, the holy widow was brought up before Lord Chief Justice Popham at the New Bailey, on the charge of harboring in her house a seminary priest. At this time she was so weak and suffering in body that she had to be carried to her trial in a chair. Her spirit, however, remained undaunted, and she rejoiced exceedingly when she beheld herself so near the accomplishment of her wishes. The only evidence alleged against her was that of one who declared that he had seen in her house a man robed in white who, no doubt, was a priest, the Lord Chief Justice, who was a violent persecutor. On this slender evidence directed the jury to bring her in guilty, and immediately pronounced upon her the sentence of death. She was then carried back to prison, where she spent the few intervening days before her execution in fervent prayer and pious contemplation. The day appointed for her combat having arrived, the generous confessor of the faith was conveyed from Newgate to the usual place of execution at Tyburn, the scene of the glorious victories of so many martyrs. The sight of the gibbet with its terrible accompaniments inspired no feeling of fear into the heart of this valiant woman, who gave herself up courageously into the hands of the executioner. When all his preparations were completed and she was about to die, she cried out to the people with a loud voice, "I am sentenced to die for harboring a Catholic priest, and so far am I from repenting that I have done so, that I wish with all my heart that where I have entertained one, I could have entertained 1,000. It is related that, as soon as the soul of the holy widow had taken its flight to heaven, the Venerable Mark Barkworth, who with another priest stood at the foot of the gallows awaiting his turn, embraced her lifeless body, exclaiming, "O blessed Mrs. Line, who hast now happily received thy reward, thou art gone before us, but we shall speedily follow thee to bliss if it please the Almighty."